All right, folks, today we got this bad boy right here. This is the TT Artisan's 75mm f2 autofocusing lens for the Sony E-mount. I am a fan of the Fujifilm XF 50mm f2, which in full frame is a 75mm. It is one of the most underrated lenses that I ever used for the Fujifilm X mount. So when TT Artisans announced this lens, I was really interested because of the love and the affinity that I had for the 50mm f2 from Fuji. I've been using it for about the past several weeks now, probably a month, and I just love how compact and small it is. And the image quality, just freaking amazing. How is this lens? How does this lens perform? We're going to talk about my experience, starting with the build quality. Now, I've tested a few TT Artisans autofocusing lens over this past year, and they all have a similar aesthetic. It's nothing inspiring, but you have the focusing ring, which is adequate. I myself would never see a scenario where I will use manual focus. I don't shoot video, so I don't need to turn the knob slowly to rack focus. Now, since this is an E-mount lens, I have my Sony a7cii II, and that has good autofocusing, so I don't think I will ever use manual focusing on this lens. Now, at the back, you have the TT Artisan's lens mount cap, and on the side of their cap is the USB-C port for firmware updates. I do have an issue with having this USB-C port on the lens cap, the back mount cap, because I tend to misplace this a lot. And let's just say I do lose this one. I don't have a way to update the firmware, so I much prefer if the USB-C port was designed to be on the back of the lens instead of on the lens cap right here. It's like literally on the lens, and I'm not a fan of that. Everyone else has a USB-C port on the back of the lens cap, lens mount right here. So I wish TT Artisan would do the same, because another thing that I do is I shoot around the beach a lot. If I were to use this lens outside in the open, I am leaving the USB-C port exposed for the salt water and the sand to get in. That could potentially render this cap useless once again, and I will have to replace it. The question now is, would TT Artisan replace this for me if it gets damaged somehow? So again, I just rather have the USB-C port for updates on the back of the lens, like what everybody else is doing. You also have an aperture ring on this lens, which I believe is a first for TT Artisans. It's very fancy, so if you guys like to adjust your aperture this way, it's available. However, I do find that the aperture ring is a bit flimsy. It's not the worst that I've experienced, but still, I think moving into the future, they can make this have a little bit of more resistance so that we don't accidentally knock or switch apertures without knowing. I have to give props to TT Artisans for providing better front lens cap now. It actually feels snug and secure, and I haven't had an issue with the front lens cap popping out. Quality is getting better, and it's the little things like this which is what I really appreciate coming from a lens manufacturer. This lens is all metal construction with a grippy texture for the manual focusing, and it weighs about 326 grams. It feels really solid in my hands, very well built. This lens also has a 62mm filter thread, and there is no rubber gasket seal at the back of the lens. But again, for $200, I'm not really complaining that much. Autofocusing for this lens is not bad on the Sony a7cii II. It still works well, but it does feel a bit slower than my Sony 50mm f1.4G Master. But then again, that's what this third-party lens has to compete against. Now, when it comes to shooting portraits, it nails the iris, and as someone who uses Fujifilm, this is quite refreshing. The 75mm focal length is ideal for portraits. However, I have used this lens as a travel lens, just shooting it around town here, and I say that it was a fun experience. The size of this lens is another thing that I like. For a full frame lens, it's quite light. It's the same size as my APS-C Fuji lens, the XF 33mm f1.4 WRLM. So putting this on my Sony a7cii II feels light in my opinion, and it's something that I'm used to. When it comes to image quality, this is where I'm quite impressed. At f2, it's sharp, like freaking sharp. It has a little bit of vignetting that I've noticed, but it's not too bad in my opinion. The center is sharp, which is great for portraits. The bokeh I found to be smooth. Nothing jumps out as jarring to me. As I was taking this lens to explore around Portugal, I honestly like it because it does have this nice little pop to an image. And I like the way this lens renders the images. Nothing muddy, just a clean image coming out of this lens. And stopping this lens down, I do see an increase in sharpness, but I'm happy shooting this at f2 since I like how my portraits look when I'm shooting this at that aperture. So overall, another solid contender for TT Artisans when it comes to an autofocusing lens. And this time they went and released a full frame lens, which is freaking amazing. Now I've been reviewing their APS-C lenses, so it's nice to get something in full frame. And at $179, I think this lens, it's awesome for its price. Chinese lenses aren't lenses from like 5 to 6 years ago where the image quality and the build quality are quite meh. I've been saying this time and time again since this this past year, but these Chinese brands are killing it when it comes to third-party lenses. And it's going to be hard for the native lenses to compete because a 75mm f2 full frame lens with good image quality and with autofocusing from a Chinese brand for $179, that's a freaking steal, man. And if you were to tell me about this lens 5 to 6 years ago, I probably wouldn't believe you. But this lens is awesome for the price, and it'll be a great lens to start with if you are just starting your portrait photography journey, or you just want like a mid telephoto lens to play with. I want to thank TT Artisans for providing me with a unit to make this review possible. And if you're interested, I'll leave the links to the lens down in the description below. And consider subscribing to my channel for more Sony content. And thanks